The forest that calls your name. Some places are not meant to be entered. Some places are alive, and if you listen closely, you'll hear it whisper, calling your name. The Forbidden Forest. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, there's a forest with no name. Locals refuse to speak of it. It doesn't appear on maps, and if you ask around, you'll only hear one warning: never enter, never answer. But people do. Hikers, campers, curious travelers. They step past the tree line, and most of them are never seen again. A voice in the wind. Ryan Parker was one of those people, an experienced hiker, a skeptic. He had heard the stories about the voices in the trees, the people who disappeared into nothing, but he didn't believe in that nonsense. So one October morning, he packed his gear and stepped into the forest. At first, it was just like any other hike: towering trees, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the occasional call of a bird. Then, as the sun dipped lower, he heard it, a voice, soft, distant, calling his name. Ryan. He froze. The voice was feminine, familiar, but impossible, because it sounded exactly like his mother. The mother who had died 3 years ago, the path that shouldn't exist. Ryan's rational mind screamed at him. It's not real. Keep moving. But his body, it had already turned toward the voice. And that's when he saw it. A narrow footpath winding through the trees. It hadn't been there before. But now, it was waiting for him. Ryan, come here. His mother's voice coming from the trees. Soft, gentle, insistent. He stepped forward, and the deeper he walked, the louder it became. More voices, not just his mother's, but his father's, his best friend's, even his own voice. Ryan, this way, this way. The campfire in the clearing. After what felt like hours, Ryan stumbled into a clearing, and there, in the center, was a campfire. The flames burned blue, flickering unnaturally, and standing around it were people, or at least they looked like people. Their faces were familiar, loved ones, lost friends, but wrong. Their eyes were too wide, their smiles were too sharp, and in unison they turned toward him. Sit with us, Ryan. Stay with us. The forest that breathes. Ryan's breath came in shallow gasps. This wasn't right. This wasn't real. And then, the trees exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath as if the entire forest was alive. The ground trembled beneath his feet, and the voices, they merged into one. A voice ancient, hungry, endless. We know you, Ryan. We have always known you. You are already ours. The escape that never happened. Ryan turned and ran. Through the trees, down the winding path, but the forest shifted around him. The path twisted in ways that didn't make sense. Branches reached for him, snagging his clothes, cutting his skin. The voices laughed. Now you run? You came to us. You answered. The exit was just ahead. He could see the break in the trees. And then, darkness. The phone that rang at midnight. Ryan Parker was found 2 weeks later, or at least, what was left of him. His body was half buried at the forest's edge, his face twisted in terror, and his mouth, it had been ripped open, as if something had crawled inside. But here's the part that no one can explain. The night after his body was found, his fiance's phone rang at midnight. She picked it up, and on the other end, a voice, soft, familiar. Help me, I'm still here. And then, the line went dead. The masked man who stands outside my house. Some nightmares don't happen when you sleep. Some nightmares happen while you're wide awake. And worse, some nightmares watch you. The first night. It started on a Wednesday night. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted. I kicked off my shoes, made a quick dinner, and sat down on the couch to relax. That's when I noticed it. Through the living room window. A figure, standing at the end of my driveway. A man, still, unmoving, wearing a white mask. At first, I thought it was some kind of prank. Teenagers, maybe. A Halloween joke, even though it was only September. But then I looked closer. He wasn't moving at all. Not shifting his weight, not checking his phone, just standing there, staring. Even though I couldn't see his eyes behind the mask, I felt them. The silence that followed. I pulled the curtain shut, took a deep breath, told myself it's nothing, just ignore it. But every part of me knew better. A cold, prickling sensation ran down my back. Minutes passed, then an hour. Finally, I worked up the nerve to peek through the curtain again. And he was gone. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Maybe it really was a prank. Maybe I was overreacting, but still I made sure my doors were locked before going to bed that night. The second night. The next evening I told myself I wouldn't look. I wouldn't feed into my paranoia. But by 9:30 p.m. my hands were sweaty. My heart was pounding. And before I could stop myself, I pulled the curtain back, and he was there again. Same spot, same white mask, same eerie, motionless stance, just standing watching. A part of me wanted to confront him, to run outside, yell, demand to know what the hell he was doing. But another part of me, the deeper, more primal part, told me not to move, not to acknowledge him. Because if I did, it might be what he wanted. The police won't help. I grabbed my phone and called the police. A dispatcher picked up. 911, what's your emergency? I pressed my lips together. Saying there's a man in a mask outside my house sounded ridiculous. But I said it anyway. They promised to send an officer. 30 minutes later, a cop car pulled into my driveway. By then, the masked man was gone. I explained everything. They checked around the property, but there was no trace of him. No footprints. No signs of someone standing there for hours. Nothing. The officer gave me a nod and said, if he comes back, call us again. And then, they left. The third night, the knock at the window. By the third night, I was on edge. I kept checking the clock, dreading nightfall. I tried watching TV, scrolling my phone, anything to distract myself. But then, at exactly 10:02 p.m., I heard it. A knock. Not on the door, not on the front porch, but on the living room window. The same window I had been looking through for the past 2 nights. Slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed, don't look. But I had to. I turned my head, and there he was, closer than ever. His white mask pressed against the glass, his head tilted slightly, and in his hand, a knife. The footsteps in my house. I ran. I bolted into the bedroom, slammed the door, locked it, dialed 911 with shaking hands. He's here, I whispered. The dispatcher kept me on the line, told me officers were on the way. Then, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice. Footsteps. Inside my house. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a baseball bat, and braced myself. Silence. Then, my bedroom doorknob started turning. The vanishing act. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the entire house, every room, every closet, every possible hiding spot. And yet, they found nothing. No signs of forced entry. No muddy footprints. No shattered windows. The only thing left behind was a single scrap of paper, left on my kitchen counter. 4 words, scrawled in messy, uneven handwriting. You finally looked. Hello. He's still out there. It's been weeks since that night. I moved out of that house the next day. But even now, in my new apartment, far away, I can't shake the feeling that he's still watching me. Some nights, I wake up and feel like someone is outside my window. I tell myself it's paranoia, that I'm safe, that I'll never see him again. But then last night my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number, 4 words. You finally looked. Hello. The last elevator ride I ever took. There are things in this world we can't explain. Things that lurk in the spaces between reality and something else. I learned that the hard way. And that's why I'll never take an elevator again. A late night at work. It started like any other night. I was working late at my office in a high-rise building downtown. The kind of building that feels soulless after hours. Everyone had already left for the day. The halls were quiet. The only sound was the soft hum of the fluorescent lights above my desk. It was 10:47 p.m. when I finally decided to leave. I packed up, slung my bag over my shoulder, and made my way to the elevator. I usually took the stairs, but after such a long day, my legs felt like lead. So I pressed the button and waited. The elevator should have been empty. The doors slid open. Inside, a man was already standing there, tall, thin, wearing a black suit. His face was expressionless. I stepped in hesitantly. He didn't acknowledge me, didn't even glance in my direction, just stood there, still, silent. I pressed the lobby button and the doors closed. The elevator began to descend, and that's when I noticed there was no button lit up for his floor, the unscheduled stop. The ride was quiet, too quiet, not even the sound of breathing. Then, somewhere around the 12th floor, the elevator jerked to a stop. The overhead lights flickered. My stomach twisted. Great. I muttered, reaching for the panel to press the emergency button. But before I could, the doors slid open, and outside was nothing. No hallway, no floor, just darkness, a void, an impossible, endless abyss stretching beyond the open doors. And then, the man in the suit moved. He turned to look at me slowly, mechanically. His head rotated toward me, and for the first time I saw his eyes, empty, like deep black holes, staring straight into my soul. He raised his hand and gestured toward the void. An invitation, or maybe a command. The whispering voices. A sound drifted from the darkness. Whispers, low, urgent, inhuman. Hundreds of voices speaking at once, some sobbing, some laughing, some calling my name. I stumbled back, slamming against the wall. The man in the suit stepped closer, his hand still gesturing. The voices grew louder. A pressure built in my chest, like something was pulling me forward. Like I was about to step into that abyss, whether I wanted to or not. The button that wasn't there before. In a blind panic, my fingers smashed the elevator buttons. Nothing worked. The lights flickered wildly. And then, I saw it. A button that hadn't been there before. A single, unmarked red button at the bottom of the panel. My instincts screamed at me. I had no choice. I slammed my fist against it. The doors slammed shut. The elevator screamed downward. Lights flashed. The whispers turned into screeches. The man in the suit didn't move, didn't try to stop me, just stood there, watching, as the door slammed shut in front of him. And then, everything went dark. The wrong lobby. When the lights flickered back on, I was alone. The man was gone. The whispers had stopped. The elevator came to a smooth stop. The doors slid open. I stumbled forward, gasping for breath, and realized I wasn't in the lobby. The walls were the same color. The floor had the same tile. But something was wrong. The air smelled different, like something rotten. And then I saw them. The people, standing in the distance, their backs to me, motionless. And when I took a single step forward, they all turned at once. Their faces were wrong. No eyes, no mouths, just smooth, featureless faces. And yet, I knew they were looking at me. Something inside me screamed, "Run." I whipped around, slamming my hand on the elevator button, praying the doors would close fast enough. The figures started moving, not walking, gliding, silent, too fast. I pounded on the button. The figures were inches away, and then the doors slammed shut, the final descent. The elevator shot down at impossible speed. I gripped the railing, barely holding on. My stomach twisted, my ears rang. I felt like I was falling forever. Then, a chime. The doors opened, and I was standing in the real lobby. What the security cameras saw, I staggered out, fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The security guard ran over. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just pointed at the elevator. He frowned, checked the security cameras, and his face went pale. Because on the footage I had stepped into the elevator alone. There had been no man in a suit, no unmarked button, no stop on the 12th floor. But the cameras did show something else. Something impossible. Something that still haunts me to this day. For exactly 47 seconds, the elevator doors had opened. And inside, there was nothing. Just a vast, dark void. And the footage showed me standing right at the edge, almost stepping in. I'll never take an elevator again. I quit my job the next morning. I moved to a new city. I take the stairs everywhere now, but sometimes late at night, I hear whispers, soft, distant, calling my name. And sometimes when I pass by an elevator, I swear I see a man in a black suit, standing inside, waiting. And I know, deep in my soul, if I ever step inside again, he'll be waiting for me.